Questions to the Prime Minister. Question number one, Mr. Roger King.
The first question to a great new Prime Minister, sir.
Despite the fact that the UK entered 1991 in recession, it seemed that the Conservative Party were benefiting from their decision to remove Margaret Thatcher from power, as they entered the year with a modest lead in the polls over Labour. The new Prime Minister, John Major, was faced with a spike in inflation, rising unemployment and falling growth as he took office. The Labour Party argued that the government should respond by cutting interest rates, but Major's government kept interest rates high as they were determined to bring down inflation. They succeeded in this aim, but the policy of high interest rates deepened the recession and drove up unemployment. More worryingly, from a political point of view, the policy of high interest rates, which peaked at 15%, caused a crash in the housing market, which left many people with mortgage debt that was more than the value of their properties, a situation called negative equity. This meant that the recession was hitting traditional Conservative voters in their pockets, which made it all the more surprising that the Conservatives started in 1991 with a poll lead.
And now follows a statement from the Prime Minister.
As your new and excitingly different Prime Minister, I'd just like to say, I am my own man. I am my own man. I am my own man.
He keeps jamming.
I am my own man.
At first, satirists struggled to depict the new Prime Minister, with popular satirical television programmes Spitting Image choosing to depict him as a robot being controlled by the former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Eventually, the image of Major that stuck was him as a grey man, so boring that he would be depicted by one sketch as literally disappearing in the middle of a speech to the Conservative Party conference. But the start of 1991 was anything but grey politically, as the Prime Minister was thrust immediately into a foreign war, as a broad coalition responded to Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait with decisive military action.
There now follows a ministerial broadcast by the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable John Major, MP.
Since before dawn today, Britain's forces have been in action in the Gulf. Their skill and courage has already been tested. Tonight, I want to explain to you why they are there and what this conflict is about. Our troops are part of an international force. It is drawn from many countries. It is acting under the authority of the United Nations, and its purpose is to end Saddam Hussein's ruthless occupation of Kuwait. He invaded without justification. His army has conducted itself without mercy. If such brutality and aggression are rewarded with success, then we are all at risk.
Operation Desert Storm lasted just 43 days, with the ground phase of the operation lasting just 5. The West had responded to a major challenge to the rules-based international order with decisive action, and the United States had asserted itself as the global hegemon. With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the imminent collapse of the Soviet Union, the world seemed to be entering a new era of Western hegemony, which led Francis Fukuyama to presage the end of history would be the triumph of liberal democratic regimes. We now know this to have been a chimera, but this was only really shattered by the events of 9/11 a decade later. The 90s therefore represents a period of relative peace, security and prosperity compared to what came before and after.
This was a well-planned attack aimed at the centre of government. On fire in Whitehall, the van used to launch mortars at 10 Downing Street while the War Cabinet was in session. An ITN camera was recording outside the front door when the blast rocked the building. Over the top of the building, a plume of smoke from the blast. One mortar landed in the garden of number 10 and exploded, blowing a deep crater in the lawn and smashing dozens of windows. The other 2 failed to go off. 2 men were seen running away from the van, which appears to have been stopped on a precise spot to launch the bombs. There's no doubt this attack had been well planned. The mortars aimed at a precise angle through a hole cut in the roof. Finding that spot would have taken weeks of surveillance.
Up until 1989, Downing Street was publicly accessible, but the gates that were erected in that year failed to prevent a mortar attack by the IRA during a war cabinet. Nobody was injured, but the mortar blast hit the Downing Street garden just 27 metres from the Cabinet Office where the Cabinet meeting was taking place. The blast caused the building to shake to such an extent that the cabinet got underneath the cabinet table. Just as with the Brighton bomb in 1984, the IRA had tried and failed to kill the Prime Minister.
What we now aim to do is to put in place a comprehensive citizens' charter. People who depend on public services, patients, passengers, parents, pupils, benefit claimants, all must know where they stand and what service they have a right to expect.
In March, the government would announce a major relaunch by indicating that they would scrap the hated poll tax and that the government would commit to a citizens' charter. Whilst scrapping the poll tax would distance Major from his predecessor, Major's citizens' charter was a continuation of Thatcherism, as it posited that improving public services meant more private sector involvement, competition, and targets to be overseen by arm's-length bodies. In truth, public services were being asked to do more with less, but the idea of introducing markets into the public sector would be taken up by Blair and would be a dominant theme in British politics long after Major left office. March also saw the overturning of the convictions of the Birmingham Six, who had been wrongly accused of the Birmingham pub bombings in 1974 and were sentenced to life in prison. And the inquest into the Hillsborough disaster was released, which recorded a verdict of accidental death for the victims of this tragedy, a verdict that would be overturned and replaced with a verdict of unlawful killing in 2016 after a long campaign by the families of the victims. In total, 97 people died as a result of the tragedy, and the families are still fighting for justice and accountability for those responsible. In April, the Football League announced plans to create a Super League that would go on to become the Premier League that we know today. Critics of the move argued at the time that this would lead to a commercialisation of football that would be damaging to clubs in the lower leagues, and which would take football away from the fans and away from the communities they serve. In May, Arsenal would be the second-to-last champions of the old Football League. At that point, Manchester United hadn't won the league since 1966-67, but with the inception of the Premier League in 1992, they would go on to dominate English football for the next 20 years under the leadership of Alex Ferguson. In his conference speech in October, Major talked about his desire to create a classless society, a phrase which I think captures a lot about how the 90s felt. Gone was the conflict and class warfare of the 1980s, to be replaced by a Britain which seemed to be more at ease with itself. From the perspective of today, we can see that this was simply Britain taking a long, deep breath during the long period of growth that would follow the recession Britain was currently in. But part of what Prime Ministers need to do is attempt to put their finger on the zeitgeist of the age. This was something Blair would go on to excel at, but that was all to come. Also in October came a significant judgment from the Law Lords that overturned the common law doctrine that the marriage contract made it impossible for a man to rape his wife. Up until this point, under the marriage contract, a woman was presumed to consent, and this was done away with, making marital rape a crime for the first time. At the end of November, Freddie Mercury responded to media speculation by confirming that he had contracted AIDS, and a day later, on the 24th of November, he died. His death was a cathartic moment for the gay community in Britain, who had lost so many so young to this awful disease. It remains a painful scar for many in the community to this day. Freddie's death would catapult the song Bohemian Rhapsody to the #1 slot in the singles charts. By the end of the year, Britain was still in recession and unemployment was now above 2.5 million for the first time since 1988. Despite this, the government had kept interest rates high and inflation had fallen to 5.9%. Over the course of the year, the government had lost 4 by-elections, which meant they had failed to defend a single Conservative seat, and they had also lost their lead in the polls, with the final poll of the year showing a 6-point lead for the Labour Party. There would have to be a general election in 1992, and signs were all pointing to a possible Labour victory, and yet it was also clear that no party had a decisive advantage at this stage. If, after 13 years of Conservative government, John Major could pull off a Conservative victory in 1992, it would be a monumental achievement. But Tory MPs must have been expecting that 1992 would be the year they would finally be booted out of office. As 1991 drew to a close, all of this remained to be seen.